we were putting mediating devices and mediating platforms and technologies in between us and other human beings at a scale that we've never done before. We were putting these things on our bodies in many cases, sensors and other ways to track and monitor. And this was all new, but human nature is quite old. So that juxtaposition, I think, means that there are certain experiences that are going extinct because we think we've outgrown them. And I don't think we have.
Hey there, welcome to the Bounce Podcast. I'm Larry Weeks. In this episode, we're going to explore what happens when certain human experiences fade or even disappear. I've been in tech since the days of legacy MCIF banking systems, and it's been exciting and rewarding. The internet's ubiquity has given us instant knowledge, unmatched efficiency. Zoom probably kept us all from going insane during the pandemic. And I think we forget that having an internet-enabled supercomputer at our fingertips 24/7 is not only amazing, but it's relatively new. Just in 2014, smartphone ownership in the U.S. was around 55%. Now more than 91% of Americans, at least, have a smartphone. So are there trade-offs for some aspects of this type of hyper connectivity? My guest argues there is. That by overly defaulting to digital mediation, where technology filters and facilitates our interactions, we are trading away the richness of real embodied experience. And in doing so, lose, without even noticing it, the very moments that make us happy and resilient. So are we shrinking our capacity for a full, messy, exhilarating experience of being human? Christine Rosen is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where she explores American history, society, culture, and the impact of technology on human behavior. She is a columnist for Commentary Magazine, a fellow at the University of Virginia's Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture, and a senior editor at the New Atlantis. Previously a distinguished visiting scholar at the Library of Congress, Christine has authored several books, including The Extinction of Experience, which was Esquire's Best Books of 2024, and it serves as the touchstone for this podcast. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and many other major outlets. She holds a PhD in history from Emory University, a third-degree black belt in Aikido, and teaches martial arts, and we talk about that on the show, where she lives in Washington, D.C. So on the show, we do discuss Christine's book, The Extinction of Experience, and a variety of topics that include how technology mediates experience, the impact it has on basic social interactions. I discuss the concept of ambiguous loss. We talk about serendipity, chance encounters, how human virtue is created, public spaces and the decline of social awareness, digital voyeurism, physical resonance in real-life events, self-isolation, how that relates to the loneliness epidemic, the science of handwriting and some of its cognitive benefits, and finding balance and practical suggestions for digital boundaries, and her choice to completely avoid social media. So we get into all of that. So here's my conversation with Christine Rosen. Thank you so much for joining me. And as we get into it here, I was trying to do my homework on your background. There's a couple things that we have in common. I remember I talked to Neil deGrasse Tyson. I was like, no way I'm going to have anything in common with this guy. But he did ballroom dancing. And I was like,
you're kidding. It's a great experiment in physics, actually. It's really
that's true. But I was blown away. So we had something to talk about. And I think this is the coolest thing. So obviously everything you do has been really cool and you're very accomplished. But you hold a third-degree black belt in Aikido. You instruct?
Yes, I'm a teacher at a local dojo here called DC Aikido.
How cool is that? So many years ago in the 90s, I took Aikido for like 4 years from a guy named Dennis Hooker. And I grew up around martial arts and did the karate thing and the judo thing. And then I discovered Aikido was beautiful. And I fell in love with Japan, which made me want to, I got a gig to teach English in Japan because I just wanted to go train. I loved all the tradition of Aikido. So you still do that?
I do. And in fact, I'm going back. Our home dojo is based in Okinawa, although we are affiliated with Hambu Dojo in Tokyo. So we did a training trip when I first started, more than 10 years ago, we went on a training trip, but we're going back. We were supposed to go right before COVID, but then the country closed down. We're going to go in August this summer. We're going to take a bunch of our students and we'll train at our home dojo with our sensei. And I'm going to see if I can tack on some extra time so I can spend some time training in Tokyo as well. So yeah, no, I
Wow.
love it. And I loved it. It will only be my second trip to Japan, but it's just an amazing, amazing country. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, that's so cool. Now I'm super curious about Aikido as to today because so then I was taking it. I was in Pensacola at the time,
Hmm.
and then I ran into a Marine. This
Hmm.
is again the '90s who was studying with the Gracies in
Hmm.
California,
Right.
Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. He showed up in the Aikido class,
Hmm.
and I heard about it. I was like, hey, can you show me some stuff? So
Hmm.
this guy was like 4'11". He's a short guy, but he tied me in pretzels,
Knots. Yes. With the
knots. Christine, you can get this. But as he was throwing me and tying me,
uh-huh.
who I thought I was an accomplished martial artist, right? And
Uh-huh.
I fell into every trap that he had. I was laughing
Yeah.
because it was so joyous that jujitsu was
Yeah.
just manhandling me. So I went down that rabbit hole,
Okay.
trained in Brazilian jiu-jitsu for like 4 or 5 years. And then I got so injured over time, I gave
So
up the whole thing.
this okay, so this is interesting because we have a guy who trains in he's got many belts in a form of Japanese jujitsu, like very traditional Japanese jujitsu.
Which
And
is where the
we're
Brazilians got it because they
comes from
migrated.
right.
Right.
But it's so dangerous. The ukemi is so dangerous that in our dojo you have to be at least a second degree black belt to train in it and take the ukemi. So I've done a little bit of the Japanese jiu-jitsu,
Mm.
but I'm 51 and a couple of those throws in I was like, this is for the 25-year-old Marine. Like we have a lot of military guys and stuff. I was like, I will show you how to do it, but you're not throwing me because I
Yeah.
actually have to use my physical body for my real job. So, but
To live. Yeah.
it is incredible. And it is like the pins are very similar, but much tighter. And the throws are just to break the neck. Like every throw should break the neck.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas in Aikido, we give a little more space for people to roll out of things and do break falls. But yeah, it's fascinating. I love the physics of it because it's extremely effective when people know what they're doing. And
Yeah.
it has nothing to do with size. It's all balance taking and getting the pins just right. It's fun. It's really fun.
And you're able to fight on your back. It was just amazing because I thought, okay, so I have this guy on his back. Oh, you're toast. But he wanted
Oh
that.
no.
And I
Yeah,
just,
exactly.
it's just really cool. Above the Law, the movie Above the Law, and Seagal and all that stuff
Yeah.
was just all these memories now are Christine are coming back, right?
He was a great Aikidoka. I mean, he's kind of lost his mind
But he's a
with the
big guy
Russia stuff.
too. I can
But he's quite
imagine.
tall. Yeah.
Right.
And actually Aikido is very challenging for tall guys in some ways because their center of gravity is so high. They're actually very easy to take their balance if you're shorter. But once they learn that, like they are very difficult. We have a guy named Munir, one of my training buddies for the last 10 years. He's about 6'3", huge guy. And for the first year, it was really fun. I was knocking him over. And now he's got a really good center. He knows how to lower his center. He's almost impossible to take down. He's one of my favorites to work with because I really have to know my stuff and do it correctly. But Seagal's Aikido was incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
it really was. He was very,
I-
very good.
Yeah, a lot of fun, a lot of fun. So I got into jiu-jitsu, it wasn't all over the country yet
Right.
at that time. And then they had the Ultimate Fighting Championships. So I was training other people and trying to find. Then I found in Orlando all this Brazilian community.
Hmm.
But the training was they were getting all these young guys in, and they just wanted to compete.
Oh, I know. And
I just
they
wanted to train.
hurt themselves.
And they
Yeah.
hurt themselves and me
And
because they're
you.
flying.
Yeah.
You're trying to go controlled. They're flying 100 miles
Yeah.
an hour, and I was getting hurt anyway. So now that
Well,
we've
go back
bored
to
the audience.
Aikido. Go back to Aikido. See, it's more cooperative.
Yeah, I was very. That's cool. Thank you for indulging me.
Sure. No problem.
I feel more connected. Okay, I want to talk about this. It's a great book, but a part of me Christine, was trying to figure out how do I present this to an audience where it's helpful. Some of this people are going to go, oh, duh, right? And some people are going to resist it and say, come on, we're living in technological marbles and we're living in the future. I do feel like I'm in the future. We're in that in between where I've seen the old using the new and I see where we're headed. Not talking about the existential risk, but just the marvels of technology. So, and I thought, okay, how do we present this? So I'll ask for your help here, and I want to have you give the audience the thesis kind of the book, but let me propose a story, and then you tell me if it kind of fits, because this is where I kind of landed is, do you remember the commencement address by David Foster Wallace, 2005? It's famous. I'd encourage everybody that's listening, if you haven't heard this or read it, please go out and read it. But he tells the story about the two fish that are swimming in the water. I think it's called This Is Water. But at the beginning of the commencement, he talks about the two fish in the water swimming, and then an older fish comes by and says, hey boys, how's the water? And the two fish swim off, and then later one fish looks at the other and goes, what the hell is water? And I thought about your book, and I thought about experience. And I think David's point was the importance of awareness of what we are in. Is that a proper context for the book? This idea of what are we losing for us humans experience, the equivalent being water, that we are ignoring or technology is pulling us away from?
It's a good way of thinking about it, actually, because one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, been studying technology and human behavior for more than 20 years. You're right. To some extent, people will pick this up and go, oh, it's another, I'm a Gen Xer. It's another old person's complaint about how things are changing too quickly, old woman shouting at clouds. But it isn't that, because I think the conclusion I came to is that we now have to actively choose things that we used to be able to take for granted. And in many cases, those things are really valuable in terms of fostering healthy relationships with each other, fostering healthy communities, fostering a healthy political culture. So none of this was any sort of conspiracy. I mean, a lot of our concerns about technology, both the existential risks of AI, which is what everyone talks about now, but before that, even the concerns about privacy, surveillance, control, all of those are legitimate and ongoing. But I think what we missed in a lot of our criticisms of technology were just how they change our everyday habits and behavior. You have a lot of anxiety about attention and about how much time we spend on screens. And I share that anxiety. But I'm most interested in how it alters our own behavior in very quotidian ways, very qualitative ways. So, do we look each other in the eye anymore? Do we choose to mediate relationships that we used to have no option but to leave the house and go enjoy? Now, on the one hand, it makes lots of amazing things possible. We get to talk face to face through the screen on a platform while recording this so we can see each other, which is fantastic. It's better than just having to hear each other's disembodied voices. But if we were close friends and we chose to interact this way or on FaceTime because it's convenient and never kind of made the effort to see each other in person, the quality of our relationship would suffer. And those little choices, whether it's handing your kid an iPad when they're sitting at the restaurant just to keep them quiet versus like engaging them in conversation, entertaining them, we're making all these choices for convenience and efficiency and ease. And we're not thinking about what we lose in the process. And we're looking at a young generation now that is very awkward socially when they're around other people. And in part because their discomfort comes from never having practiced enough. That's just with people. We can look at the way it's transformed how we interact with our
in
yes,
person.
in
They
person.
haven't had the
They
in
haven't
person.
practiced. And they feel anxiety. They feel genuine anxiety about it.
So last night, I had my stepson and his wife over. I said, I'm going to talk to you, and I'm having this podcast. I don't want to be an old fogey. I was worried, not worried, but is my bias that I'm old enough to have lived without it and then adopted it. So I feel like I've had this great balance. But I'm also a meditator, and I do things that are practicing awareness and all these things that help me be more present or mindful, right? So I was like, okay, tell me, because they're great kids. 25, I'm calling kids. So I said, this is her thesis. This is what we're going to talk about. Is this your experience, or tell me what your experience is with digital and with they both said, yes, you should have that conversation. It is an important conversation. They were very aware because they didn't grow up with it, but younger in their life, that technology was part of their life more sooner than it was mine. So I was surprised. And then his wife said, and she's young as well. It's funny. She was talking about a 19-year-old that she had to train and work. And that prelude is to, I'm trying to piggyback on what you said. She said, I said, she goes, Larry, I had this conversation where we were talking in person, and she said, I'm finna gonna do it. And she was talking in text. I was stunned
Well,
Christine.
she's thinking in text,
She's
which is even
thinking in
more
text
worrisome.
terms. And so I was blown away because this 25-year-old is saying, what? And then she went like this, right in front of her. For the
Like
audience,
she's
I'm
bored. Yeah,
yawning,
she's yawning. Yeah.
which you and I would not,
No, I would have been fired from my first job if I did that. But yes.
Anyway, those are, sorry, firsthand experiences that I just found out about. Just
Well, this younger, I have sons who are 18. They're twins. They're freshmen in college, and it is fascinating to me to see they are very aware of missing something in a lot of social interactions and of the power of these devices. My kids got their smartphones pretty late, like they were already high schoolers when they were allowed to get them. Some of their friends had smartphones since second grade. Their entire lives were mediated through a device that gives them I think, false but nevertheless powerful sense of control, a powerful ability to, even when you're physically in one space, remove yourself from it mentally and emotionally and focus on the phone. And for the young, I think that gives them a sense of control and power at a moment in life where a lot of change is happening. A lot of the world feels scary and new and anxiety inducing. However, it trains you in habits of mind that leave you lacking those skills when you do get into the workplace, for example, and your boss says, go over and talk to that new client and sell this or that, or go over there and manage this other employee who's doing such and such wrong. Suddenly you don't have that device to mediate that relationship or to tell you what to do. You have to figure it out on the fly. And you have to actually learn how to sit and understand your own emotions. That's what worries me about the younger generation, is that they can escape their emotions all the time by picking up a phone, just like all of us as grown-ups can fill every single moment of interstitial time with a distraction on our phone if we choose to do that. What that means, again, is it makes us less patient, less tolerant, because we're not practicing those things. And this is where, I might sound like a Victorian scold, but in fact, these are all the things that, as a hybrid generation that I'm in, where we didn't have that option as kids, we had to fill our time. And yeah, we were bored. And I'm not embracing boredom for all, but I'm saying boredom also teaches you some self-control, some virtues. It also allows your mind to wander and be more creative. And all of those things we've, again, not out of any sort of conspiracy or direct effort, we've leached those from daily life without really thinking about what that means. So you do end up in a generation. I have a woman who I know who was training young diplomats. She's like, I end up having to teach them how to properly shake hands and behave in a room with others from a foreign country with whom they're having a discussion. That was bizarre to her. And
what
yet,
what age were they?
so these were college graduates. So these are like very young millennials.
Okay.
But they were raised on social media. They were raised in ways that they were that generation that really was an experiment, social experiment on a vast scale in terms of social media platforms. They came of age with Facebook and whatnot. So, and their ways of interacting and reading each other's signals are not quite as good as others. Now, again, I'm making broad generalizations here. This obviously isn't true of all younger generations. And there are plenty of problems. Look, the boomers ruined Facebook. We all know this. But the point is that the tools shape our behavior intentionally and unintentionally in ways that I think we haven't fully recognized and attended to.
So I made you jump right into the kind of the deep end of the pool here, in the sense of some examples of the problems here. But your book, The Extinction of Experience, could you just summarize, because you pretty much explained it already, I'm sorry, but if you could just summarize the thesis, then we'll tie all these threads together, because I want to say something else.
Sure. I actually borrowed the title. It's a phrase that was used by the naturalist Robert Michael Pyle many years ago. He was studying how to teach kids to understand the natural world. And he was concerned that because kids were spending less and less time outdoors in nature, mucking around, seeing animals and plants in their natural habitats, that as they became older, if a species went extinct, they wouldn't even care because they'd have no experience of it in the real world, and they wouldn't have that connection to it. That essay really stuck with me because although he was talking very specifically about the natural world, it struck me that in our human relationships, we were doing something similar. We weren't practicing the basic human skills, the things that evolutionarily we're wired to do, like read each other's facial expressions, be physically present with others in group settings to hash out our difficulties, to laugh, to play, to do all those things that humans are wired to do. We were putting mediating devices and mediating platforms and technologies in between us and other human beings at a scale that we've never done before. We're putting these things on our bodies in many cases, sensors and other ways to track and monitor. And this was all new, but human nature is quite old. So that juxtaposition, I think, means that there are certain experiences that are going extinct because we think we've outgrown them. And I don't think we have. So face to face communication, in person interactions, these are vital. They're not something we should outsource entirely to technology. Handwriting turns out to have all these cognitive and memory implications that if we just give up handwriting and only do things on touch screens or voice memos or typing, we're losing something. So I think the debate we should be having as a culture isn't, well, let's just get rid of the old and not worry about it and embrace the new, but understand the trade-off so that if we do say we don't need handwriting, we know what we're giving up. Okay, it's a choice. But it's an informed choice. And in all of these ways, I think we find the new thing so compelling and technology so marvelous that we forget there's always a trade-off to it. Sometimes that trade-off is worth it. Look, I don't want to bring back the telegram as a form of communication or carrier pigeon. I benefit from these tools every day. I use them in my work and in my personal life. But I also understand when I'm making the choice not to be with the other person, but instead to just send them a text message. I'm making a choice if, for people who use Facebook, the reminder to send someone happy birthday message is done for them now. We outsource that emotional obligation. So it's that awareness that I think is really the sort of unanswered conundrum that we haven't fully wrestled with as a culture.
So and I'm going to point people to the book and read the book, but is there a ladder or a scale, or is there just a focus on technologies that mediate experience or allow someone to avoid an experience, which may be the same thing? Is that the focus, or is it more general than what I'm asking?
It's the mediating technologies that allow us to, particularly for face-to-face interactions, to mediate between ourselves and others. But it's also replacement technologies. And by that, I mean platforms, software, devices that claim to know more about us than we know about ourselves, to mistrust our intuitions and instead outsource our emotional and physiological responses to a sensor that will turn it into data and feed it back to us and say, this is who you really are. So all of those ways in which we can measure and monitor and we think control ourselves and others also concern me for a number of reasons. And then the way in which we consume the experiences of others more than going out into the world and having our own. I mean, the fact that, if you look at the number of hours people spend watching other people do things on YouTube versus what they do with their leisure time is worrisome, because getting out in the world and having those hands-on experiences are valuable to human beings. We learn things about ourselves and others. We have social skills. We have a culture right now that, again, people talk about the loneliness epidemic. I think that's wrong. It's an epidemic of self-isolation. We can be very happy in our own little worlds and are alone by ourselves at home. We can be constantly entertained. We can have everything brought to us. Again, not in every place. You live in a rural area, it's quite different, but that is the promise the technologists have sold us: an on-demand culture, anything you want, anytime. You can build a world and live in a world online that's going to be more creative and give you more control over yourself and over any number of things than in the real world. And I think people are starting to find those virtual worlds more seductive, more appealing. So what happens if we abandon the physical world and we abandon face-to-face? So all of that is so I do look at art. I look at, the way we consume any of our pleasures, food, art, sex, the way everyone wants to outsource everything to technology because it's easier, it's on demand, it gives me exactly what I want. But that's bad for us as humans. We will take that path if it's offered to us, but it doesn't make us better people. So I also worry about, cultural patience. We've become more impatient. We've really allowed our public social spaces to deteriorate. All of these are connected in part to the choices we're making about mediating the way we make our way in the world as human beings.
I'm a technologist, but I am, again, I keep thinking, am I just getting older or what have you? But I'm starting to reflect on what we are losing. I spent a lot of my career trying to move very large retailers, the biggest in the world, from physical stores to online. That's where things were headed, and companies and people that are involved with were pioneers in this area. And it was exciting. But I was in a mall the other day and it was like, an episode of The Last of Us. You know,
Yeah, it's depressing, isn't it?
it was
Yeah.
depressing. Then there was another mall I hadn't been to in many, many, many years that was still kind of thriving, and it felt like a time travel. It was like,
Mm.
oh wow, this was. I remember when I would eat here at this cafe and then go to this store. So, geez, I do sound old.
I'm taking you down down the path of nostalgia trip, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I just want to say, look, I benefited greatly, was rewarded greatly for moving things digitally and having a career in technology. But yeah, it's this thing of, we have cars, now we need seatbelts. We went from the horse and buggy, now we need painted roads. And I'm like, okay, we got to learn how to live and not lose our humanity here and I also want to say, I'm pointing a finger at me as we have these discussions about how we're being affected, right? Because yes, I was going to say the other story she told me last night was, now I'm talking about what we're losing, what we're at risk of losing and what we're losing now. And she told me something that just shocked me. She goes, I asked this young girl, these people, to make some phone calls about some insurance issues. And they freaked out. She goes, what do you mean? I have to call them? She goes, yeah, just say, and told her what to say, but they just could not do it. Fearful.
Yes. Yes.
So that just struck me. And I guess I just haven't been aware of this. I'm like, wow.
But this is where the habits of mind come in, because we've created tools that are so good at doing things for us. But in the process, they've made us more machine-like. Like we're conforming to the machines more than the machines are conforming to human needs. So if you grow up doing only texting, never talking on the phone, rarely having as much face-to-face interaction as people in previous generations did, then why would you want to pick up a phone and talk to a stranger? Can't you send them a text message? Can't you send them an email? Can't you just, send them a DM on social media? Like all these ways of communicating have these layers of, it's almost like plausible deniability, right? It's like, I can't get too close. So that means I'm also not too responsible if something goes wrong, right? There are all these ways to control one's world. But as we know, part of what is great about getting older and being a human being and learning all these life lessons is you make mistakes and you learn from them. And there's this sort of general fearfulness. I think it speaks to the anxiety, particularly of younger people, about kind of throwing themselves out there and doing that, unless they're reflecting kind of whatever the group mind tells them is appropriate. So in a weird way, it's a lot of conformity, I think, for a generation that loves to perform its sense of self and perform all of its identity politics. There's a conformity to it because it all is fed through the same platform. Everything has to conform to the demands of that platform. When I teach young people, I teach college students about technology and ethics. I always say, we'll pull up whatever the popular social media platform of the day is that they mostly use. We take a little survey and I say, okay, show me the menu, like all the options, how you can do all this stuff on it. And then I ask, what's not on the menu? What have the people who have designed this for you to use not included, not allowed you to do? And they're often shocked. Like, what do you mean? I can do anything. No, you can't. And so we are designing a world where we embrace these technologies, which do amazing things for us, without really thinking, okay, what is it taking off the menu? What is not on offer here? What skills and human interactions are we not allowed to really do anymore? And how are we being asked to act more machine-like? Every time I have to do one of those prove you're not a robot things on a website, I'm like, I'm becoming the machine. I mean, I do it, but that's an example. Again, I'm habituated to it now. I'll do it. I'll click through the boxes and find the crosswalks and the buses and the motorcycles. But that's training me in behaviors that didn't exist even, 20, 50 years ago.
And as we talk, I want to illuminate the wonder, and I just want to amplify the importance of experience, human experience. And part of me, I don't know what you think of this, but it seems to me that we are not only losing virtues, but maybe virtues are only had via experience. In other words, I'm not sure you can read and acquire, I'm not sure you can acquire virtue via reading. It must be lived, I think. So I was thinking patience is a virtue. Well, that cannot be had without the experience of frustration, or of waiting in a line, being stuck in traffic, or getting in an argument with somebody in person. And thinking about this, I was like, holy cow, what other virtue? Resilience. I can read Stoicism all day, but if I'm not out in the world and recovering from a setback, a rejection. Let's say somebody say no, or I get on the phone. I just get on the phone and say, because this will happen. Hey, I'm the insurance company. I just wanted to let you know your bill was paid or handled. What are you talking about? And somebody just screaming at you on the phone.
Right.
That's going to happen.
Right.
But resilience is taking that and moving forward instead of collapsing. I think that only happens through experiencing, having that happen over and over again.
And you know what else? And this sounds weird because we like to think of ourselves as far more tolerant society. I think we're losing tolerance for other
Mm.
people. And setting aside political views, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just like tolerating the weird, quirky habits of others. So if you live in a city, as I do, and I ride the bus, you have to tolerate people. Now, everybody puts on their earphones and like tries to create their little digital bubble. And I get that. I'm not arguing that people should not distract themselves on a boring commute. But just like when you step into an elevator, and the polite thing to do is kind of, give a nod to the stranger. That's also a sign to that stranger, if they return the nod, that you're both safe. Like you're not going to attack each other. It's a safe, it's like, okay, we're good. We're all people here. And the stories we see over and over again in public space where people are so enraptured by whatever's going on their phone that they don't see what's happening to those around them, including people being attacked or people being harmed. And they'll film it if they notice also, which is disturbing, right? They won't intercede. They won't call 911. They'll just start filming it like instant voyeurs. So all of these are ways of shaping behavior that, again, I don't think people are actively choosing. It's just, oh, look, I got a camera in my hand. I'm going to film what's going on, rather than understanding that they're in the physical presence of others. They're part of the story, but they set themselves off to just document it for social media or for whatnot. And that is, again, that's a very modern, technologically driven way of approaching everyday life. In some cases, it leads to, important change. If you document something terrible happening and then you can show the world and then change happens. It can also, though, lead to a sense of, I'm not responsible for anything because I'm just documenting it. That's the way in which I
The
worry.
voyeurism, yeah.
Exactly, a kind of mass voyeurism. And then when something goes wrong, everybody's pointing the finger. Well, it wasn't my fault. I was there.
Mm.
But that, again, we have obligations to each other. And when I think about the sort of leading edge technologies now in terms of interpersonal behavior, they're all targeting the weakest members of society: children, the elderly, and the sick. So, you don't want to go visit grandma in the old care home because it's too far out of your way. You can give her a robot seal and she can pet it and she feels great. And everyone goes, isn't that better than nothing? And I become enraged because I'm like, no, what's better is if we as human beings go and visit grandma because she's there by herself and lonely, and we owe that to her. But I think the technology allows us to avoid confronting our ethical obligations to each other in many of these cases. And that worries me because that leads to a very atomized society that can't figure out how to get along even at the basic level.
I think you mentioned the book, but I'm not sure. Serendipity,
Yes.
the aspects of these happy accidents that, so I think the pandemic really screwed the country
Yes.
up. Now, and I'm not talking about, yes, the deaths and the thing, but I'm talking about, and in many ways, this is where I'm thankful for technology, because I could
Mhm.
stay in contact safely with people, Zoom and all these, again, when it was happening, I was like, well, thank God for these technologies. But the isolation,
Mhm.
depending on where you lived and what have you, just, I think, really screwed us up, and especially the young people. But I was thinking about, what we're losing, and if we're not careful, serendipity. And this is something you can get right back. You can get back. If you, so during the pandemic, groceries were being delivered, so we stopped going to the grocery store. That kind of made sense, right? Because you're exposed to a lot of people and touching things, but it became so easy and convenient to get groceries delivered. We still kind of do that, right?
Mhm.
But now there are occasional trips I'm purposely going out. And I remember when I first started venturing out and back to the routine of going to the grocery store, I was delighted with the discovery aspect. In other words, normally you pick from a menu, dun, 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 you have a purpose and it's focused, but you lose all this discovery of what else is in the aisles and what have you. Plus, just bumping into people. There are also these studies about micro friendships where these
Yes.
little interactions with people during the day, real saying hi, and makes them happy and you happy. People,
Mhm.
I don't think people understand this. Generally, it's like a glass you're filling with water. This happiness
Mhm.
just collects over time with these little interactions. But the other day, I was going to the grocery store. I'm sorry, I was going to the post office, which is next to the grocery store, and I pulled my car in, and there was a guy, he pointed to the lot next to me. So I got him like, or the parking spot next to me, what's wrong? And there's this little baby squirrel fell out of the
Oh.
tree, and it looked like it was injured, but it was still alive and fine. And so I grabbed my hat, picked it up and put it on the grass. And then another gentleman, so three older guys were standing on looking at this baby squirrel. Now we're all three waiting for the mom. We're
Right.
like, right. So we're sitting here, and then we see the squirrels run around. Right? Oh, is that her? Is that? And so we don't know because it's it's running around. But it walked over to the baby, went right up to the baby, and the baby flipped over.
Oh.
And none of us had seen this in our entire life, right? The baby flipped over, and the mom picked the baby up, and we sat for 10 minutes. We watched this mom take the baby. It was a wonderful experience that you're just not going to have if you're just isolating at home, ordering everything in. And it reminded me, Kurt Vonnegut wrote this essay, I think it was 2009, I can't remember, about buying an envelope. His wife said, get some envelopes. And she said, go, you can go online. He goes, no, I'm going to go out. And he wrote this whole essay about everything the benefits of going out to a store to buy an envelope. Sorry, that wasn't my long soliloquy of serendipity.
No, but it's interesting, right? Because you were talking about browsing in the grocery store, right? So when someone says, what is a browser today? Everyone instantly thinks technology, right? Browsing is a human activity. It's when we go to old bookstores and browse the shelves, that is opening ourselves up to a serendipitous moment. Just like if you go out into the world, you might bump into someone you might have a brief conversation with a stranger that nevertheless induces some small level of happiness. And we know from social science research, they've done these really fascinating studies where they have people walking across, a public square, and they'll deliberately look through that, like they'll make eye contact, but then stare through them as if they're not there. Or they'll do stuff like they'll have their phone and like completely avoid, so the person knows that they are being ignored. And then a few minutes down the path, they'll ask the person that was ignored or the one who might have gotten a smile and a nod or kind of a friendly greeting, how they feel. I think it was a German study. I have it in the book, but it's called like looked at as if through air. And the people who were sort of ignored in that way, not acknowledged, where their presence was as if they weren't there at all, felt terrible. And of course, you can understand, again, humans are wired to be acknowledged. It's why people originally flocked to social media platforms. They wanted acknowledgement. They wanted feedback. They wanted people to say, I like this. You're great. I'm going to be your friend. But at scale, that is not a replacement for actually smaller acts of human kindness and human acknowledgement that we should give each other on a daily basis. And I think we believed the conceit that was sold to us that it was an improvement on these human interactions, when in fact, it's ended up being a replacement in some cases. And it's allowed those other more basic human skills to deteriorate. So again, it comes to like a balancing act for lots of people. I don't use social media for that reason. I don't find it useful at all. And I've never used it. Some people have to use it for their jobs. They have to use it for other aspects of their work or their personal lives. And I understand that. But striking that balance between, especially post-pandemic, where we have not yet gone back to the levels of pre-pandemic in terms of face-to-face interactions and back to the office and all these things, we are crafting a preference for avoiding human interaction in a way that's really bad for us as a species. I really think it is. And I know all the flexibility of working from home and having your own schedule and all this stuff. There's a whole argument to be made about whether you actually need to be chained to a desk 9 to 5, 5 days a week.
I think it's place purpose. I think it's horrible for the younger people not to be in office.
Right.
Now,
So
if you're
isolating.
older and you've done it and you're married and you got kids, I don't need those connections as much as I
Right.
did, right? But Google had a policy, I think it's gone now, but it was you were in office and they designed the most amazing offices. I'm so
Right.
thankful that
So you could bump into people and
that's
strike up
they
conversation.
actually said the whole reason they had cafes and everything was that you
Right.
would have these happy accidents and come up with these ideas. And by the way, that happened. I experienced it. I would talk to a developer with a different team about something else and then have this great idea. So the whole purpose of the office, it was planned, they worked with that to better the company and come up with great ideas. So that's a loss. And I want to point the finger at myself and you said something about phones and looking through people. I just heard Esther Perel, she's a famous therapist who she had this term and she was talking about people, in a conversation and for everybody listening, I'm holding up a phone and then dipping my head. So, having a conversation and occasionally dipping your head down to
Mm-hmm.
look at the phone
Mm-hmm.
and doing this with somebody else. And she said it's a form of ambiguous loss.
Mm-hmm. It's
And
a good
and this
phrase.
this hit me between the eyes. She says, "Look, people who have Alzheimer's could be in a room with someone, a family member, and the family member doesn't know if they're present there. They could be in and out because of
Right.
the condition, right? Do they remember who I am? And you have this ambiguous loss." She goes, "People are experiencing that now when someone else dips down into this device
Mm-hmm.
because you're wondering, did they hear me?" She said, "They are present, but there's no presence."
Exactly.
I was like, holy shit, I've done
Mm-hmm.
that. I'll
Mm-hmm.
get distracted, I'll a text or what have you. And so that helped me because I tend to do it if I'm not careful.
Mm-hmm.
Most part I don't. I think I'm pretty good at it.
There's an exercise I gave to a friend of mine whose boyfriend was someone who did that a lot, and it drove her absolutely crazy. And so I said, and she's like, "Well, I'm telling him to stop, and he doesn't listen." Just da, da, da." I said, "Well, next time, don't scold him. Just when he turns his attention to the phone and you're in the middle of a conversation, just go silent and see what happens." And so, of course, that's the best rebuke because they were in the middle of a conversation. He'd be looking at his phone. So she would just wait. And then he'd look up and say, "Oh, what were you saying?" She's like, "No, I'll wait till you're done." And it wasn't passive. I mean, she literally would just say, "No, because you've chosen to focus on this now. So I'm not going to keep speaking." And it was funny because it only took her doing that a few times before he was sort of abashed at how bad his habit of checking his phone had become. And so he changed his behavior because he wants to hear, he loves her. So it's not like it's, any sort of power play. But I think in among strangers in social space, it often is a power play, right? It's sort of, I'm so important. And remember when the first mobile phones came out, the people who had them would sort of loudly scream into them when they were in an elevator or something like, "Look at me with my brick phone. I'm so important."
Yeah.
But now people walk around with earbuds in, having these conversations where 100 years ago they would have been considered a crazy person having delusions, walking around in public having conversations with someone in the ether. So the norms are way behind the technology. They always have been. This has always been a struggle throughout the history of our embrace of new things. But both the intimacy and the speed with which we're adopting the intimacy of the technologies and the speed with which they've come to market mean we don't have 100 years between the radio, the telephone, the television set, and then any sort of mobile communication technology, which allowed people to kind of figure out how to negotiate new social norms.
Is that the difference that you think from because there were people always
Right.
warning of when the
Of
radio
course.
came out, we're going to lose community.
Right.
People are going to go to church anymore, whatever. And then the TV, there was always some
And
Cassandra warning.
And I will
Sorry.
say, and this is what people forget when because I hear this warning, that said all the time to me. If you're a critic of technology, you'll hear it daily. They were right about some of that stuff. Actually, television did pull people into their homes and away from communal third spaces where they used to gather and talk and meet people from other walks of life. Now, we decided the trade-off was worth it. But yes, the difference is if you look at how quickly mobile technology in particular, and the smartphone especially, and all the platforms and sensors and devices that it hosts, that is very, very, very fast in terms of humans' ability to adapt to a new tool. And the fact that it's on our bodies and in our homes all the time. I sort of half jokingly always ask my friends who say, "Oh, I am in control of my phone use." I say, "What's the last thing you touch at night and the first thing you touch in the morning?" For many people, it is that phone. It's not their spouse whom they say goodnight to. It's the phone because it's a clock, it's all these other things. So we haven't even really acknowledged just how dependent we are on it as a tool. So these efforts to take it out of our hands are very good. You go hear a concert now, a lot of comedians and other artists will make you lock your phone away for the duration of the concert. And it's not just that they don't want you like pirating whatever they're doing, it's that it's a different experience if everybody doesn't have a phone and you're all just in the moment together as a group of strangers enjoying the performance. I mean, I've done both. I've been to concerts where all I see are just the glow of screens filming the concert, and no one goes back and really looks at those clips, right? What are they saving them for? So all of these ways of trying to adapt our behavior to the tool, we're going to make a lot of mistakes, but we can't assume that the new thing is an improvement. That's where I become very deeply curmudgeonly, because some of our new things aren't actually good for us. And we need, like, think of fast food. Like, fast food in moderation, like, have it a couple times a year, you're fine. But if that's all you eat, you're going to be unhealthy pretty quickly. So not every new convenient, efficient thing is actually what's best for us on a daily basis.
Yeah, I was thinking about proximity. I remember during the pandemic, a lot of Zoom calls, and then I went to a concert that was in a neighborhood where everybody was 6, 7 feet apart. And I had one of my best friends across the street. We were listening to the same concert. And I remember thinking the distance, there was a weird loss of intimacy. It was just a weird experience because I really couldn't connect. He was a little too far from me. And Zoom was the same way. And then the first time everything was clear and we were, very close to each other talking, it was just a different experience. And then I thought about resonance, where, if you ring a bell and there's another bell in the room, if it's within proximity, that bell will resonate because
Mhm.
of and I was like, that's part of the human experience, this vibration, for lack of a better word. I don't know how to explain this, but between two people or events or things or animals or whatever, we're losing that if we're just living within this digital VR, this non-real. You said something that struck me. I heard you. Sam Harris I'm a big fan of Sam
Mm.
Harris. You were talking to him, and
Yeah, that was.
you said real feelings in unreal environments or something like that. Yeah.
Yes, because I would never pretend, and I think unfortunately some critics of technology have done this, and this is incorrect. We are having real emotional experiences online. When you get a text message from someone who you really like, you get a real feeling of emotional satisfaction. So those feelings are real. The question is whether they can reach their full expression only in virtual environments, or if we also need to make sure we're having those same experiences in person. And I tell a story in the book. It really struck me. There's a young man I spoke to on a college campus. I was there for a conference, and he had heard me speak, and he came up afterwards and he said, I had this Facebook friend. This is some years ago, so all the college kids were still on Facebook, pre-Instagram. And he was saying, we kept in touch. We were from the same area, but we had never met in person, but she was so friendly and she helped me out. And then one day, they knew what each other looked like because they had their Facebook pictures. One day he bumped into her and they started talking, and he was like, I was sweating, I was anxious, like my heart was racing. And I was like, oh my God, I must be getting sick. Like, what is happening to me? And then he's like, and then I realized I actually found her really attractive. So and it's because he never, like, his physical body in the presence of an attractive female who he knew a little bit about in this abstract virtual world and had pleasant emotions towards. Suddenly he's face to face and he's like, yowza, his body's like,
Yeah.
yes, you like her, ask her out. But he was surprised by his own body's reaction. And that to me was an extremely telling moment in our culture, because he couldn't read his own bodily signals. I mean, he figured it out pretty quickly,
Mhm.
obviously, but it baffled him at first. It confused him. And that's because he hadn't had enough of those interactions to be able to tell one from the
Awareness.
other.
I go back
Awareness.
to, and I
Exactly.
thought about this before we got on our meeting here, is I thought about awareness atrophy.
Mm-hmm.
That I think if we're not careful, that aspect of, because you talk about it a lot,
Mm-hmm.
embodiment, or
Mm-hmm.
what's embodied or not. And this awareness is this aspect of us that senses and takes in everything, even if we're unconscious,
Mm-hmm.
movements and what have you. So I think that's the other thing we're going to lose, or it's going to atrophy, this general human awareness that of our general experience. When I go back to resonance, I was going to tell you this because it just happened, is that speaking of resonance, I play tennis. I'm a tennis player, and I watch a lot of it on TV. It's been a long time because Roger Federer retired. I haven't been to a tournament in a very long time, just because it was almost over for me when he got out. I was just a big fan. But I used to love going, and I would go a lot. So a friend of mine just invited us to Delray Beach to a tournament there, well, a minor tournament, but it's easy to get to. So we went. I was ho hum. I was like, okay, just it's a good trip. It's a nice city. We'll enjoy it. And I went, and just like your friend, I'm watching, because we had great seats, so we're right there, and I'm watching this. It's making me want to move. It's
Yes.
making me want to hit the ball. It's making me want to play.
Right.
I never get that. Rarely do I get that watching TV
Mm-hmm.
or YouTube, whatever. But I'm in this presence of the sound and I'm
Yes.
seeing the movement, and I think it's resonating with me to, man, I couldn't wait to get back and play. And I
Right.
was like, this is why this is important,
Right.
right? This is
That's
why a
right.
live event is important. You go to a concert, I'm sorry, it's it's not going to be Apple AirPods or
Right.
the best speaker. It's just this resonance that you're missing out on. So everybody, please go to a tournament or go to an event.
It's sometimes also, I mean, the tournament is fun. The concerts, I love going to comedians and live music. I had always struggled a bit as a kid with museums because I would be dragged to museums and I'm like, I gotta sit, it's so boring. I don't really understand art. But as I got older, I decided, I need to educate myself a bit because there's and I met friends who studied art history who, taught me some things, gave me books to read. But all of the best friends of mine who appreciate art always told me the same thing. They're like, go to the museum, sit in front of a painting and just look at it and try to just look at it and try to figure out what the artist was trying to do. Now, if it's an abstract expressionist painting, I'm like, oh. If it's a beautiful Rubens, I'm like, oh, they're depicting this, oh, it's the Annunciation or so all of that. But in each case, the thing that I kept coming back to, and I think this is true of going to see athletes perform or musicians perform, is you go with some humility, right? You're like, I'm going to go and see what this person can do. And I'm kind of open to the experience of what they have to show me. Now, you might end up saying, well, that was terrible, or, oh, they lost the match. But it's the humility part of it that I think technology erases from that equation. So the Google Art stuff is like, we can show you art at a scale that even the human eye can't show you. You can zoom in, you can do this, you can control everything about your experience of seeing the painting. Now, I have used it a lot to see stuff that I can't travel a million miles, to go see in person. But it isn't the same, and we shouldn't pretend it's the same, and we absolutely shouldn't pretend it's better. It's different. It's a qualitatively different experience. And so I would like to see us start to be more specific about not either equating the things or arguing that the technological version is better, because that's the conceit that gets us in a situation where thinking that if you send grandma a text message rather than getting in your car, driving out to the next city and visiting her is the same thing, because, oh, you've reached out. I reached out. And I noticed I have friends who do like business consulting, and they were very annoyed at a certain point when the big phrase everyone used was touch points. So it's like, yes, I've had a touch, I've had a touch with this
7
guy.
touches.
Yes, all
Yeah,
the
yeah.
different touches. And one of my friends is like, you never actually see these people. It's all a text message or an email or a voice call. And he was struck by the fact that we're using the language of actual physical interaction while retreating from it. And trying to pretend like we're still in this, making the same sort of connection. So in all these ways, we try to trick ourselves into believing that this new way of doing things is better and we don't need the obsolete way. Again, sometimes that's true, but when it comes to human interaction, I have my doubts.
So give us some prescriptions here or something, because again, these technologies are wonderful. Algorithms are wonderful, but I certainly understand there'll be spatial functioning that we're going to lose if we always default to Google Maps. And I'll try to, if I know where I'm going, I've gone once, I'll try to turn off the maps and just go and maybe just check for traffic. So these tools are wonderful. They make our lives better. But in some cases, especially in this context, are probably making our lives worse if we're outsourcing some of this human experience into digital platforms. So help us out. Like, how do you balance? Because I was thinking as you were talking, the phone is the last thing I touch when I go to bed. Some of it because it's so utilitarian, I'll have an alarm on it. My Kindles, my books are there, right? But also, I have a small SaaS platform I'm kind of managing at the moment. I built that I'm checking email, just did anything break or what I've got alerts and alarm, I've got metrics that I look at. So that hit me between the eyes. I'm like, all right, how do I do that? And by the way, the Kindles on I read a lot of books. Obviously, I'm prepping for a lot of podcasts. So I've tried the Paperwhite. I've tried separate device besides my phone. It's just not. They're not good enough for me. Yeah, I don't. Whatever, black and white, or my eyes aren't good, or what have you. So I struggle trying to figure out how to balance the use of these technologies, because I was just the other day watching a show on TV and looking at my phone. Like, I'm like, what am I doing? It's like,
Well, so
Larry,
this
focus, either turn the thing off or, you know what I mean? So
so this is where this is where I get to, so I'm a historian. I'm not good at giving prescriptions. I'm good
yeah,
at
but
descriptions.
this is what I
But I
thought. You've
do,
had many conversations. I know you've
yes.
had these
And
questions,
I
right?
do,
Yeah.
I did think about it a lot because I'm like, I can't just be railing against this and not offer some path forward, because I've thought about this a lot in my own life and with my kids. And one thing I will say that I do, and I do it several times a week, is I try to slow down and have, as you say, cultivate awareness. So for me, that means not picking up my phone during interstitial moments of waiting, and instead just either always having a book with me that I read that isn't, I don't read stuff on my phone. So I either have an actual book with me that I'll crack open and read. More often, though, if I'm in public space, I look around and I kind of watch people. People watching is a really undervalued free form of entertainment. Or I let my mind wander, I think. So I have fallow time rather than attention to the screen. So interstitial moments, sitting at stoplights, waiting for the bus, standing in line, it cultivates both patience and awareness. But mind wandering, daydreaming, these are things we need to valorize, not see as inefficiencies, because we spend so much time stimulating our brain that we need that downtime. The other thing I would say is that when it comes to the people in your life whom you most care about, you have to actively choose the human path, the face-to-face path whenever possible. If you live across town from a good friend, make the effort to leave your house and see that friend and make plans to see them in person, because the ease of digital communication, even throughout the day, like I have friends who I text throughout the day and I feel close to them, but you know what? If I got sick and needed help, I also know they would show up at my door to help. And a lot of the sort of social relationships we have online feed the need to communicate and touch base, but are they the people in your life who will show up? Are you the kind of person that will show up in person to help someone? Those are the kinds of questions I think that are always in the back of my mind when I think of how I mediate my relationships. So each of us can do better there. And then finally, just cultivate patience and time away from screens. You have to actually actively choose that on a daily basis now, because everything about our work and leisure time has been colonized by technology. It's just simply a fact. So if you want to try to live a different way, you have to be in a kind of nonconformist. You've got to choose that path. And I think there are great rewards to it, but it is going against the mainstream right now. More and more people and younger generations, I'll give you an example. My sons have these friends, and I don't allow cell phones at the table for meals. So their friends were always had to put their phones away when they come to my house for dinner. But they now, as college students, they told me they do this game. You might have heard of this. If they all go out, they're all poor, they're college students. They put their phones in the middle of the table, and whoever picks up their phone first has to pay the bill for everyone. Otherwise,
I have not heard of that. That's
they
great.
each pay their own tab otherwise. But if someone, and it's because they know if they don't make the rules, they're all going to end up on their phones checking. And again, as you said, that kind of inattention that actually degrades a social interaction. So these might seem like small, mundane, tiny little things, but I've found they've helped me, at least personally, cultivate more awareness about my own tech use, and have really made me think about whether I need to put a screen between myself and other people, whether those are my loved ones or just strangers while I'm waiting in line. And you can have those serendipitous little moments like you did with the baby squirrel, like the baby squirrel moment, where you happen to just have this human moment with strangers that is actually quite lovely. So we're
It was
missing out on
lovely.
those.
Yeah, I was telling it to a friend, and I was a little sheepish at first. I'm like, I'm talking about a baby squirrel, but these grown men, one almost got teary eyed just
Yes.
watching I was like, it's a human, back to human experience. This human,
Yeah.
I was trying to think, how could you make people appreciate their own human experience, like some kind of premature nostalgia or some kind of, because I remember during the pandemic, there was no traffic on the road. It was no
Yeah.
traffic on the highway. It was depressed. It was like the end of the world. It's like, what? Now, this is traffic that you hate your whole life, but all of a sudden, as soon as it came back, I felt, a little joy. It's like, oh,
It didn't feel like a dystopian apocalypse. Yes.
right. It's that kind of thing that even at our difficult moments, we are still alive. We're here. And Joseph Campbell said something, and I'm going to misquote him, but the gist is, I don't think people are looking for meaning in life so much as a sense of aliveness.
Yes.
And I would encourage people, if you want to increase your sense of aliveness, it's not going to be digital, your head in a screen, as much as you have to do it or when you do it. But I have this end of the day review at night where I kind of I may have my eyes open depending, but sometimes I'll close my eyes and just think about what I did during the day.
Mm.
And it makes me feel more alive.
Mm-hmm.
And it just amplifies the experience I've had during the day. So if I went for a walk or if I ran into people, these things pop up in my head and I'm reliving them, right? But the digital stuff doesn't come forward at all. And even
Not
though I'll
embodied.
think about
Yeah.
what?
It's not embodied, and you make different
That's
memories. You actually literally make different memories of when you have mediated experiences versus embodied experiences. Yeah.
It's really interesting, right?
Yeah.
So aliveness.
Yeah.
Christine, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I'm going to put the show notes and all those links as
Great.
well as your books. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. You were
Yeah.
great. Cheers.
Bye.
Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, do share it with your friends and on your social platforms. Big thanks to Sam Williams, my audio guy, and the beautiful bumper music you're hearing is Michael Petrovich's Bella Luna. For all my show notes or resource links, visit larryweeks.com, and we will talk again soon.